Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. I am Bart, and on this episode we're talking about the June Nations League windows that the U.S. men's national team just completed. 2 games against Grenada and El Salvador. But before we get talking about that and bringing on a very special guest, I do want to remind you to follow the show on Twitter at Soccer for Us Pod and subscribe to Soccer Down Here on whatever podcatcher you are listening right now so that you get every piece of content that the STH network turns out. All right. So without further ado, I am really excited to bring on a guy who has made a wonderful name for himself in the U.S. soccer fan-sided media. His name is Marcus O'Malley from ChasingACup.com. Marcus, thanks for being here. How do you feel the day after the World Cup host cities were announced?
Yeah, I'm feeling all right. Yeah, thanks for having me on, by the way. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. I would have loved to have a central U.S. a little bit closer to me, Cincinnati or Nashville. I'm in Louisville, but I'll be traveling and taking the kids to experience their first World Cup games live. So I'm excited for that. I'm just pumped for that to get rolling.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that Ohio and that kind of Midwest region didn't get anything. Part of that, I think, is Chicago obviously dropped out of their bid. But yeah, the Ohio team's not getting anything, nothing from Michigan or anywhere around there. A bit curious, but we have 11 sites here in the U.S. Yeah. I'm sure we will find a way to get to one of them. Obviously, I'm in Atlanta. We got a host site, but I'm going to do my best to go to a couple other places. It's just exciting that we have a World Cup.
I know it's coming back, and I think I was just reading that the last one here still holds the record. It's one of the top attended, and I think those numbers are going to get blown out of the water this round.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great launching off point for U.S. soccer. That's for sure.
I do too. Right on the back of MLS signing their new TV deal, so I'll be curious how that plays out over the next. I think everybody thinks it's a lot of money now, but I wonder if it'll be different view after 26 if the game really takes that next level.
Yeah, I think it's a very important time for soccer in the United States. The groundswell of support that the game hopefully will get going into 2026 and then after, it could really take off. I mean, that's what we're hoping for. We're both fans of the game, people who want the game to grow. So
absolutely.
Now, you have a website called ChasingACup.com. You post a lot of great news sources, news stories, and track some players who don't get the attention that maybe other news sources would be able to give them. Tell me more about what y'all do and why you do it.
Yeah, so you kind of answered the why. So 6-7 years ago, I kept getting tired of hitting refresh on Google and trying to find stories about young U.S. players not named Christian Pulisic anywhere. And kept seeing, you've already read this, you've already read this, you've already read this, for 2 and 3 weeks at a time. And had a couple friends that were plugged in, a guy that played for Chicago back in the day and was on the national team back with Landon Donovan and buddies with CJ Sapong. So got connected through that, American Outlaws, to a couple guys, and really just was trying to put content out there that nobody else was about the U20s. It was hard to dig that up. And so I would put the effort in and start posting it, and then just started gaining traction and connections and trying to grow and get young guys' attention, on the national scene to fans, hopefully for coaches as well. The scouting for the U.S. is growing, but, 7 years ago, it was not there. And so I was just trying to help bring some noise, hopefully bring some attention to some of the young guys. And, it's just a space for me to talk about things. I like having I probably have 20 or 30 writers over the last 6-7 years, giving people a spot to kind of put their thoughts out there that maybe don't have a platform, and a variety of different views, right? There's the Euro snobs and the pro MLS and a bunch of us somewhere in between that just love the game. And I like having both sides. I like hearing the passion from different groups and the variety. So Chasing a Cup is a platform to just be more noise and more opportunity for different thoughts to be shared out.
Well, obviously, this has been a great cycle for the coverage of youth players specifically, because we have, I think 11 billion players under the age of 25 who are doing good things.
Absolutely. All over it. And we probably don't know the other 40 billion that are still yet undiscovered.
We'll talk about that U20 squad at the end of this, but I going through that U20 squad, it's okay, there's a lot of names that I know, but there's a lot of names who is that again? Because I don't have time to digest every single young product that we have in this country. And we talked about the exciting times of 2026, but it's really exciting right now, the youth development movement that we've seen in the United States.
Absolutely.
I do have to ask, as you look at just youth players, where do you say that a player isn't a youth player anymore, or isn't a youth prospect?
I think they move from prospect when they become a regular player and have a shot at the national team. It's kind of my mentality. Like Gio Reyno, I would not consider a prospect. It's not really age, right? Like he is well established. Ricardo Pepi, there's some guys on that list that are younger than guys that I would still kind of consider a prospect. I do think positionally it matters. I think people forget that because we've been spoiled. Like a Chris Richards, I talk about it a lot. I was like, he is not normal. Like everyone's sort of like writing off guys at 21 at center back. Like he is an anomaly. Like CCB, EPB, they're on a very normalized trajectory for center back. Goalkeepers, everybody wanted David Ochoa and Gaga to blow up the scene. That is not normal.
It was weird. Obviously, as an Atlanta fan, I kind of have two examples of that. We have Miles Robinson, who was drafted out of college and was a pretty good player in college, but it takes a while for a center back to develop. And Tata Martino talked about that a lot. And then finally in 2019, he gets his opportunity. We're seeing that now with a guy named George Campbell, who is getting opportunities and is a pretty darn good center back now. But as you mentioned, like, he's still under the age of 22, which for center backs is a time where you have to learn so much about the game. Gaga Slonina is another great example of, he's really talented, but I was very much cautioning anyone who wanted him to be going to Qatar. It's not the space.
Yeah, and I'll throw another name and we'll talk about it. But Josh Winder, he's a 16-year-old now, 17 at Lou City, starting center back for a near championship team. Has been over to Portugal 2 years before he even has a shot. He does not have a European passport. That they went over to Portugal and got a look. It is an exciting time that our second tier soccer league is putting a teenage center back over in Europe to get a look. Like that. That's an exciting time for soccer for me.
Yeah, it's definitely great to see the academy system from USL taking off, as well as MLS academies that are most clubs are doing it. And I think it's really a nice point of investment for these teams.
Absolutely. The network just grows. The potential of that pool just grows. The more we have sites and places for those guys for free, or very inexpensively to get trained up and get spotted.
Well, speaking of Louisville, I really wanted the Grenada game to be played in Louisville. I thought that would have been a fantastic opportunity to showcase what I think is maybe the best, most beautiful soccer stadium in the country. I'm not going to lie. I snuck in when they were still constructing on it in 2020. It was like almost done. And I happened to be passing through Louisville and I was like, I'm going to go look. And I started looking around and like, there was like a gate open and I was like, okay, I'm going to sneak in here. And a construction guy caught me. He was like, hey, what are you doing here? I was like, oh, I'm just looking. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. So it would have been really cool to bring Grenada to a place like Louisville where, you have a stadium that would have been sold out. And, it would have been less hot than in Austin, Texas.
Right.
But so let's talk about these Nations League games. So we had two great friendlies, really, I would consider pretty high level friendlies. I mean, Morocco, yes, they're kind of not as intense maybe as you would have thought, but two very high level friendlies. And then you have to turn around and play a team in Grenada that is ranked 170th in the world, and a team in El Salvador who is not a bad team, but obviously not going to the World Cup. What were your goals specifically for this window as you looked at the two Nations League games?
Yeah, I don't want to underscore Grenada, but just I'd never really take much value out of that game. I think that's good. It's a good confidence builder. Usually it's almost more negative that comes out of that game, like just beating up an opponent. If you can't do it or somebody struggles, that's a problem. So more of like a red flag. And then I thought the El Salvador game, like that's good competition. I mean, they were hungry for it. They had a chip on their shoulder coming into that game. It seemed it was feisty. So I was, for me, I tend to look at the back of the roster. It's not going to impact the Christian Pulisic or Weston McKennie. It's sort of, hey, you're on the edge. Can you hold on to that position, fit well within the ranks, or a guy scratching at the surface? Can you break in? Can you make a name for yourself? either offensively or just being a rock solid, consistent player in the back. That's typically what I would say. Those fringe players.
Yeah, I think that was a good test against Grenada is to see some of those French players take on an opponent that I mean, quite honestly, we're much more powerful than. I mean, we beat them 5-0. It really could have been more. What do you take from, a 5-0 win on a very warm night in Austin, Texas? It took a while to turn up the heat, but it was a 4-goal second half, and I think that made us feel a little bit better. But as you looked at the game as a whole, was the scoreline indicative of anything that the game told you?
I don't think so. I was a little disappointed as you were, that first half. Like I think we should have dictated immediately. And it feels like we don't have that killer instinct. We struggled all during qualifying to score goals. Like to not dictate that early and often was a little disappointing to me. Like I would have loved to have been up 3-4-0 at halftime and then been able to sub in deeper down the bench.
Yeah.
To really get a look at like a guy like Haji Wright probably should have gotten a half in that game. But being, a closer game, I wonder if that's what held off on Berhalter, pulling the trigger on pulling Jesus out. Like I would love to have Jesus have a hat trick by halftime and get another striker in there scoring goals.
Right. Yeah, I think that was the disappointment of the game as a whole. Is it was really frustrating that we did a good job of getting into attacking phases that were pretty, I would say dangerous, and then just for whatever reason, it was a missed pass, a missed touch, a bad cross, and it just never came fully together. Or we would get that chance and then we would miss it. That was frustrating. The second half was better, and it was nice to finally see, okay, let's put 4 goals in. Right. But yeah, it just was a little frustrating, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I would have loved to see Haji get in there and get a hat trick himself, right? Like having two strikers, getting their confidence up in the summer. He's gotten the goal with the penalty, but to get a goal in the line of field, and that would have probably led to a much more confident Haji coming into that second match, had he put a couple away. Yeah.
Well, my goal for the window was for a striker to score a goal, and that happened, but it just didn't feel as I wasn't as satisfied as I thought I should be.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm glad for bagged a bunch. You could tell he was confident, happy. I felt like maybe in the El Salvador game we felt that like he played a little more confident, turning and shooting where maybe he was hesitant before. Like that's what a game like Granada can do for a striker,
right?
Especially, yeah.
Well, let's talk about the starting 11. We had Matt Turner in goal, Reggie Cannon, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Aaron Long, and Walker Zimmerman. Aaron Long and Anthony Robinson across the back line. That back line was, I think, a pretty strong first choice back line for what this camp had.
Yeah, I agree.
And then in the midfield, Kellen Acosta, Weston McKennie, and Luca Della Torre. Obviously, Kellen Acosta, the second choice, number 6, but I think he had a really good game. I mean, granted, wasn't under a whole lot of pressure, but he showed well. And then McKennie and Della Torre was an interesting midfield pairing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I agree with you. I thought Acosta had an excellent game. I think I've been very curious to see Luca a little bit more integrated with the A team. Like I feel like he's gotten chances with the B team. I think him and Musa are a very interesting pairing. I thought him and Weston were very interesting as well.
Yeah, it was. I think, unfortunately, we didn't see the productivity that we wanted. And I'm not blaming Weston because obviously he's coming back from an injury and hasn't really trained at this level or at least at game speed yet. But you could tell that there was just something off about him. Yeah. But you could also see that the magic was still in there, and that was nice. But Luca was fantastic, I thought, the whole game.
Extremely sharp. I was actually trying to think if I could think of a single errant pass. I'm not sure that he did have a single one in that game. I also do think like they suffered a little bit having that front line that they did. It was not as together. It was a little bit disjointed. Areola and Morris have not been top form all year, really. Ariel's been kind of up and down. I think Morris has actually had a terrible year up until the next game, the final minute of the next game. I really have not been impressed with him, even for those that would make a case from a couple years ago.
Yeah, the front three of Areola, Morris, and Ferreira, it really was an opportunity for Areola and Morris to kind of show, in my opinion, it was their chance to show they belong. I don't know how much Greg Berhalter will actually look into that, but if I were him looking at this, I have to look at my two, what would be backup wingers, but still guys who I would expect to produce. And it wasn't good. I mean, I know Paul had an assist and a goal, but he also was very bad at times. And Morris was, I think, ineffective. And I hate to dump on him, but like this is where you do have to consider the quality of the opponent and say, guys, y'all weren't able to get it done against an 170th ranked team when Iran is going to be the lowest ranked team we face in the tournament, and they're like 22nd. So
Yeah. I agree with you. I think the goal and the assists were far overblown by a lot of analysts coming out of that game
yeah,
for Areola. Personally, like he gave a lot of midfield balls away, just errant, like
yeah,
normal, square balls. It was not like trying something creative. It was he just seemed very clumsy on the ball. And I agree, Morris was almost invisible. I feel like, which really hurt what I would have liked to see out of McKennie and Luca. And I thought
yeah,
Luca was very sharp in that game and kind of wasted,
yeah.
because of that front line.
And I'm going to add another player who was just, I thought, very ineffective in attack was Reggie Cannon. Going forward, it seemed like that almost every time we gave him the ball on that right flank, the attack just died. And different than Jedi, who I think also didn't play well. At least Jedi was able to get in a cross, and it may not have been a good cross, but he was able to get in and get a cross in. And Reggie, like multiple times, it was just like a bad touch, a touch that a run that wasn't where it needed to be, a pass from him that ended up being completely way off, and it was not a good showing from Reggie Cannon for a guy who I get is looked at as a defensively solid player. You weren't going to show that tonight. It was like you weren't going to show that against Grenada that you're a great defensive player. You had to show your offensive ability. I don't think he did a good job of that at all.
I think he's supposed to be a defensive specialist that doesn't make mistakes. Like that's kind of his MO. Yeah. And I thought he destroyed that reputation offensively,
yeah.
in that game, and probably did more for Shaq more than himself,
yeah.
or Yedlin even, to kind of move their stock up by just not being decent against a team like Grenada.
Well, we did get a first half goal. Jesus Ferreira finally got one in the 43rd minute. Again, it just felt like it took way too long for us to get that first goal. But it was a nice goal. I mean, I think it's an example of Jesus's quality and ability. It's just one of those things, and I talked about on my last episode of the Jesus Ferreira conundrum of always creating and getting into good scoring opportunities. I mean, Greg loves his XG stat, and I think it's a valid stat to point out why Ferreira is a great striker for this team. But at some point, you do have to score.
Yeah.
And it just takes too long, it feels like.
Yeah, the only pushback I have there is who else is doing it. It isn't as if we haven't explored somewhat. So I feel like Jesus has sort of secured one of the three spots in that role. He's not the dunker, he's not the Peacock and others that are in there to score but still haven't. He does bring other values to when we have our top guys Pulisic's on and can put it away. Weah can score. I do think Ferreira with scoring wingers is probably our most complete Berhalter ball striker of the group. Unfortunately, we don't have any strikers that are scoring goals. But I'm with you. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and I have to always think about that as Berhalter doesn't expect his strikers to score a bunch of goals. And I think we as fans expect that because when we think of a striker, we think that's your job. But I do just want to say, as a striker, your job is to eventually put a ball away.
Right.
And we saw it during qualifying where he didn't really capitalize on the scoring opportunities he had, even though chances. I mean, I think about that El Salvador game at home in qualifying and he had another one against Grenada where it's like, dude, you're almost in the goal and somehow missed.
I know. It's frustrating, extremely. And also the number of chances he's gotten. You have to wonder if Peacock got as many minutes as some of these other guys. If, Haji was getting as many chances as some of the others guys, would he have racked up a couple by now and maybe gotten his rhythm?
It's definitely one of the biggest criticism I have of Berhalter is he gives certain guys way too many opportunities. And we kind of saw that with Aaron Long in this game where he started – I think every match of this window. Yeah, he started both matches of the Nations League, and it's just like he keeps getting opportunities. And I don't think he was particularly bad in the Grenada game. He certainly wasn't bad against El Salvador, but I would again ask, what did he have to show? And I asked that kind of the entire backline because CCV is in this of he didn't really have to show anything defensively either. So what do you take from the defensive performance out of a 5-0 win against a team that I think had 3 shots the whole night?
Yeah, I actually do recall, I think it was Long who just completely mishit a clearance that rolled over his head and landed inside the 6-yard box that any decent team probably would have put away. Not going to beat a guy down for a single play, but to have done that when you've had so few chances to get touches and gotten so much time. I also have an issue that doesn't get brought up a lot. I think Zimmerman is somewhat guilty of this too. The both him and Long tend to clear the ball into the stands, and not that that's a terrible thing, but so consistently that I'm like, guys, like at least a third of those, I feel like you could have just taken a quick pause, had a lay of the land, and maybe controlled, where that will matter against England. It might not against Grenada, it might not against El Salvador, but those things will matter. And Chris Richards is not a guy that does that. I thought CCB did a better job in that game. Even that was very visible to me, where he would just take a touch and check and, maybe, or at least play a ball that was like a 50-50 ball rather than punted it. It's like, hey, I'm going to put it to midfield, but we might get, a quarter of those, half of those back, versus just punting it out and giving them a throw and losing possession.
Yeah, I'll stick up for them a little bit and say that I think that is a very big result of the instructions they have from club. And so when you're practicing, especially Zimmerman, I mean, I think he and his counterpart Romney at his partner at Nashville have like led the league in clearances every year they've been with Nashville. So that's just a Gary Smith wants to get the ball away from goal as much as possible. And obviously with Aaron Long playing in a Red Bull system that would rather not have a ball actually on the field would lead to you thinking, okay, they're not really going to try to look for that pass. But that was absolutely something I noticed from CCV. And it wasn't just even clearances. It was a ball that was kind of a 50-50 aerial duel, or one that just kind of came mid body. He was still able to make a pass out of that. Right. And I think what you're saying is those matter, being able to make a quick decision, being able to use the ball to still, it's not even starting an attack. It's just keeping possession and finding an option.
Yeah, I mean, against better quality teams, as you mentioned, like our group is significantly higher talented. Like we are not a high shooting percentage team. We need the ball more. We need more chances. And if we got a quarter of those back, how many more shots would Jesus potentially had in those games and so on.
Well, I think specifically when we're talking about, they're just kicking it long. If you had the opportunity to just take a touch or take a first-time touch to pass the ball to a guy like Serginho Dest, well, now we may have started an attack upfield, or a guy like Yunus Musa, who can very easily turn a defensive position into an attacking position.
Luca De La Torre, who is extremely active and constantly dropping back to collect the ball, and I thought did very well. Costa was making himself available to that back line. Like they could have very quickly turned a couple of those into chances that you'll feel against an England, a Wales.
Yeah, and I think I agree. Those are the little things that matter, and it's not just Long and Areola or Long and Zimmerman, but like I understand why they do it, but we have center backs in our pool that just kind of take that second to think about a pass.
Agreed. And it made me think of like a CCV Richard. Like I'd just be very curious to see what those two would look like, with the pace and the physicality. It just sort of like made me wonder more than I probably would have, except I saw him like plinging them so far. And I get your point, but again, at that international level, those little touches matter.
They do. I do have to ask, do you think that the Grenada goalkeeper is in the wrong sport? Because he was throwing punches out there like crazy.
Yeah, he looked good, man. He looked good. I think he might be interesting. It's funny. One of my buddies lives down there, and he's actually played with a couple of those guys.
That's awesome.
On that team. I'm hoping I'll get down there and get to play the national team.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be there next March, so that might be a fun trip if you're a U.S. fan wanting a March break from whatever doom and gloom city you're in. The last point I do have from this game, from a player perspective, and I do not like this player on the U.S. national team. I think a lot of people have an issue with this player. It's Christian Roldan. He got a decent amount of time at what Seattle fans have said is his best position on the wing. Did he do anything that made you go, oh, he maybe belongs?
I hate to beat guys down. I really do. But there are a few guys that, maybe him, maybe Ariel is the only other one I can think of, that has really had such little impact with so many opportunities, and it's hard for me to believe that Conrad Some of these other wingers that are in the pool, Matthew Hoppe, regardless of where they are,
Yeah.
Club situation, couldn't at least provide what he does, if not more.
Yeah. So I think this is my biggest take on Roldan is everything we hear about him. Oh, he's a competitor. He's great vibes, good eyes as a coaching staff. It's like he's Chris Rogers before he got the super soldier serum, right?
Yeah, yep.
A guy who like you want on your team because he's a great guy. You want him as a friend, but like you don't actually want him to go fight your battles for you because he's not going to win.
Yep. Yeah, and at some point, I mean, and I know people get excited. We've got Pulisic, we've got Weah, we've got Reyna. These guys get injured. You know, it's not an enormously deep pool that we're like 8, 9, 10 deep like France and others. We have 3 or 4 really good ones. Brendan Aronson may need to double centrally. Reyna may need to double centrally. You know, West was injured this year. We've got Luka now in the pool, but after Musa, West, Luka, we're looking to our wing depth. And so to me, that 5th and 6th winger matters. Like we're probably going to use them in the World Cup at some point, just with our injury history and having 3 games, hopefully more. You know, if we perform well in the group, 4 or 5 games, like we're going to tap into that depth. And Roldan is not the guy that's going to do any damage once we get to an elimination round.
Yeah, and obviously the counterpoint to that is, oh, well, he's versatile. And again, I just go back to you're not versatile if you're not good at either position, right? If you're the 6th choice at one position and the 8th at another position, that's not versatility, which is kind of the I think the selling point of a Reggie Cannon, where he did show earlier in June that he does provide some tactical versatility. But I would again ask, was it good enough? And those are the questions. Just because you can play multiple positions doesn't mean you're good or serviceable at multiple positions.
Right. And you've got Brendan Aronson and Reyna who can play centrally legitimately at the highest level. And those are, to me, are 2 versatile guys. And then I want some specialists, you know, like I want a winger specialist, maybe a goal scoring one, which is, you know, we can talk about Morris in a second. You know, I've got an interesting take on him, but, you know, we don't need a guy that doesn't really do anything well when we have versatile guys like Aronson and Reyna who can play centrally very well at the highest level.
Well, you mentioned Morris, and he gets the equalizer in the El Salvador game. It was a 1-1 game that I felt like when he scored that, it actually felt more like a winning goal because of the way that we just dominated the match. I have to be honest. The El Salvador goal was a complete fluke by all accounts. I mean, it was the type of game that you actually wanted to see from the U.S., but it was also the type of game that we've seen from the U.S. against El Salvador multiple times recently. El Salvador is a very hard team for us to play against because they actually are good at trying to play soccer anyway. They're not, you know, bunkering. They're a pretty talented, individually talented team anyway, and they've got a good coach. And a 1-1 draw in El Salvador on a field that was basically a mud pit because of the monsoon season in Central America, and you come out with a 1-1 draw, it has to feel positive, right?
I think so. I think the goal was a fluke on their part. The red card, you know, would have been caught in VAR, in my opinion. I don't think Areola's was a legit red card. I do think the other one was. There was a handball in the box that wasn't called. We finished that game strong. Deserved 2 goals from it. Taking one was at least right. I can let ties go, even losses, when I feel like we dictated the play and there were some valid reasons that we didn't finish things off. I didn't like that Hadji was pulled at halftime. I think that was a mistake.
I agree.
Confidence-wise for him. I don't think Ferreira was treated the same way, you know, historically, or other strikers would have been treated the same way as him. And Berhalter went after him after the game. I don't like any of that at all. It felt very wrong to me how that all was handled.
Let's talk about Hadji then, because Berhalter's comments after the game were very pointed, basically saying it was disappointing. The player, he and his teammates were disappointed. And I find that a very weird statement, a super direct and targeted statement, especially when he has taken such care in his past press conferences to be positive of any player mentioned. And, you know, it's not just even players that we say, oh, well, he's just like every player he's tried to be positive of. I mean, the most directly critical that he's ever been of players is John Brooks, but it hasn't been like negative necessarily. It's just been pointing out very specifically, like, we don't like this about, or we think this could be better. This was a very negative comment about Hadji after 45 minutes played in not only a rainstorm, but on a pitch that was already soaked with mud and reportedly even had metal bits coming out of it. and it wasn't his. I mean, he's not the Ferreira. I'm going to drop deep and connect. So I don't get what Berhalter expects out of a forward like Pifak or Wright, who still are quality with their feet. I mean, it's not like they don't not have the ability to pass with their feet or connect with players, but they just don't drop. I mean, Ferreira at times drops like almost into the frickin' our own defensive half.
Yeah.
Right, and PFOC and others aren't doing that. But
No.
why does he see that as such a negative? I don't get what was so bad about the right performance.
No, agreed. And it was uninvited. Like John Brooks, I think he owes us because he's not playing him. Like the media has every right to ask it.
Yeah.
It was an uninvited assault, in my opinion, like unnecessary and a friendly. I know he missed the one chance, but I didn't think he played terrible.
Ferreira missed chances. I mean, it's not like
Ferreira
that's what I don't get.
Yeah, even in that game, I recall I actually wanted to screenshot it. Ferreira and Areola were just standing on top of each other at one point. I think it was Luca that was running across. And it's like they didn't even move for him.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was frustrating. And I didn't understand the comment in the context. The only thing I can think of is that Greg has been constantly beaten down for not being able to get goals out of his team. And maybe people were calling for Haji and calling for PFOC. And maybe that was like his defensive. Right. I'm not defending it, saying it was a good call, but I can see where his frustration maybe came out of like, look, I keep playing every striker in the pool and none of them can score, you know.
And yet the striker he loves so much also didn't score this game. And that's what I don't get. It's like, and I don't think that Ferreira was particularly influential in creating chances. And so that's where I just go back to this system has a problem with its strikers scoring goals. And I don't think Berhalter truly this is a problem we have with Berhalter is even a guy like his favorite son Gyasi Zardes isn't as effective in the system at this level because it just doesn't make itself conducive to a striker staying high, getting in the box and finishing. And I think it's almost a disservice to rely only on a striker who can drop so far deep to where he's actually on the same line as our defensive midfielder. I think that's a very naive and kind of altruistic, really, version of what Berhalter wants the game of soccer to be played like.
I agree, and at no point have I felt he's identified a solution. Like okay, then we need to be a set piece scoring team, or we need to be killer at corners, and we need to be thinking about that, or setting up our wingers for goal scoring opportunities. I just haven't seen his offensive intelligence game develop over time. And for me, that's where I'm like, man, Haji and Pifak are critical because you need somebody that can just dunk it sometime. Like, yes, they haven't yet, but if you can't score and we're down a goal against Iran, like, what are you going to do? You have to put a striker in there that can score and put bodies in there that can score.
I mean, this group has looking at the World Cup, this group has the potential to play out a lot like that 2010 group that we ended up winning, where we needed a win on the final day. A draw may not have been enough. And that's where you might need just throw a PFOC or a Wright up there. I mean, shoot, Walker Zimmerman at that point might likely just be playing as striker, who I have jokingly said is probably our second best striker in the pool because he does it so often for Nashville and for club in its past. But like, you have to have that option. And as much as Ferreira does a lot of things well, there are glaring holes to his game. And I'm with you. It just seems so weird that it's inconsistent that Berhalter gives him all the rope in the world, but then Haji Wright has a bad 45 minutes on a field that is not unplayable, but very hard to play on, especially hard to make runs on, and goes, no, that's not good enough. You disappointed all of us. You let us down.
And then keep giving Pulisic the ball when he's clearly just not got it that night on cross. Like we're not solving the problems we need to solve when it comes to just scoring goals. It seems like almost indifference. Like, no, we just keep doing the same thing. Eventually we'll break through. It's like, guy, it's been 2 years now. Like that plan has not worked.
Berhalter is, we know he has plan A and plan A is what it is. And plan B is do plan A better. Let's talk about the starting 11, though, because there were a couple changes that are worth noting. Ethan Horvath starts in goal. The back line was the same. Midfield was Adams, Aronson, Musa, which I really thought Musa was great this game. The front three were Weah, Wright, and Pulisic. Now, that front three was about as strong as for Wright, I think that would be the one criticism is you played with your two best wingers and weren't able to really do anything, although he did get a couple of opportunities. I mean, so it's not like there was nothing. That midfield trio, though, I thought Aronson was ineffective, but I don't know how much I blame Aronson, how much I blame the game state and the field itself, because it is such a difficult field to play on the way that I think Brendan Aronson would want to play, but he also wasn't that effective. But let's talk about Ethan Horvath. He lets in a blunder of a goal. I mean, it really was. I understand completely why the goal went in. He played for a cross, and Larine took a shot that may have supposed to have been. It was a direct shot that went in the goal.
Yep.
Horvath made no attempt to save it. He got completely caught off guard and caught out of position. It was one bad moment. But are we at that point where one bad moment is enough to keep you from going to Qatar, or do you think he still has enough cachet to still be in the mix?
Yeah, I mean, Zach Steffens had one bad play.
He's had a lot of bad plays.
Matt Turner against Canada, I thought that was a bad play. Horvath has not had many chances, so it's more glaring when you have fewer chances when you make one bad play. I thought it was kind of a freak goal. I didn't think Canada did a good job defensively. He sort of gave him some space. Horvath has 100% on his shoulders to blame for a junk goal, but to me that's not the resume. But you see a guy like Sean Johnson, who I thought played very well. I think Turner has played himself into the one, if not 1A, 1B, however you want to call it. I don't know where Zach Steffens stands. I know he's a Berhalter favorite, but for me, like from a depth chart perspective, like it's probably between him and Horvath for that third spot at this point. I think Sean Johnson has done enough consistently to probably be in that mix of that four. Yeah.
I think Johnson did kind of steal a spot to Qatar with his performance against Uruguay, which the best team we played this window, and he kept a clean sheet. I mean, he had made a couple saves that
absolutely phenomenal.
Granted, Matt Turner did the same thing against Morocco. So I kind of am seeing Johnson on that plane, and I feel bad for Ethan because I think that he has the potential to be a really good goalkeeper. But I mean, I think when you're talking about the third goalkeeper spot, you're not looking at who's necessarily the best replacement. You are looking at a guy who probably is the best teammate at that point in time, or best in the locker room. I mean,
And you have Man City tied to your name, that still helps Zach Steffen regardless of the execution, like just that pedigree and that training, I imagine is pretty high level and probably something that he brings to practice with goalkeepers that Berhalter is not his specialty. Like I can see where it's like a locker room guy, to your point, that people like and respect would be valued.
The silver lining for all those guys is only Johnson is over the age of 30. So they have a 2026 World Cup firmly in their sights. There's no reason to not expect them to hopefully be winning a starting job by then and being the number one for the U.S. by 2026.
They also have a couple months, we'll see where Horvath lands if he gets transferred, which I would imagine, he's either transferred or loaned this fall. We'll see what happens with Zach and Turner. If all three of them are the bench, I don't know that also doesn't secure Johnson's spot, right? Like having three players that aren't starting.
And you're the only one starting for the defending MLS Cup champion, a team that's still, a top team in their conference.
And you've got the Uruguay, resume from this year.
It's an unfortunate data point in that analysis because it's such a glaringly, I mean, Zach Steffen has made some mistakes, but yes, the one against Costa Rica was definitely his fault, but it wasn't a directly, you allowed this goal to happen. It was like, well, you did this bad thing, and then three other bad things happened because of it. Whereas this is like, no, the goal was scored because of your mistake.
Right.
And I hate that for him.
I do too. I like him a lot. He seems like a good kid. He seems very close with Pulisic, which I think, benefits us, to that Roll Dan point. If you want a locker room guy, you want it, your best friend, your best player there, keeping him calm and collected. So, there's probably some intrinsic value there, but there's time, there's time for him to make a name.
So let's talk about the two other players that we talked about earlier that we need to talk about now is Paul Arriola, Jordan Morris. Now, Arriola did not start. He comes in the 61st minute and gets a red card in the 2nd minute. Now, I understand that probably on VAR that would have been taken away as a red card. I still think that he gave the referee every reason to go, yeah, it's probably a red card in my book. I don't agree with the referee's interpretation, but it's hard to go, okay, his foot was at the guy's knee. He slid about 5 yards. It looked like a red card challenge in live action. But even before that, it wasn't like he added something to the game. And he came on for Tim Weah, who was visibly displeased. He got taken out of the game, which, I mean, doesn't bother me, but I was upset because Weah at that point was really starting to cook on that right side. He was combining well with Luka. I felt that was a big mistake from Berhalter more than anything about Areola. But then I have to go, Paul, how do you justify what your performance was in this game as not also as catastrophic as the Horvath blunder for the goal,
No, I agree with you. The result, saved him probably more than anybody, and obviously the second red, helped a lot to kind of mask what he had done. I do feel like, and you've said this already, a couple minutes ago, like, I feel like Berhalter comes into games and is like, I'm subbing at this point with this guy and this point with this guy. And it never has felt to me his whole tenure that he has felt out a game and made the right call. Canada, subbing in the 82nd minute, and going back a couple years when Lovitz came in, we're down a goal, like we've just seen it. And I've not seen that growth in him as a manager over the last couple of years in any capacity. But especially in that area.
Yeah, I just really, the drop off from Weah to Areola is noticeable. It's a lot. But then on the other side, well, I guess he was playing on the right side after Areola got that red card, was Jordan Morris. I will say Jordan was much better this game than he was against Grenada. But I think the only areas in which he was better was crosses into the box that he could try to get on the end of. You mentioned that handball, which I do think would have been called on VAR.
Yeah.
I understand why it wasn't called in live action because things like that in the box are just crazy. But that was a Morris challenge for that header. Then he ends up getting the goal to tie it. But then you have to compare that to what he did against Grenada. And to me, the two just kind of feel like a wash, or is that too harsh on him?
I've just never been keen on him. And so it's like, I'm trying to be unbiased just to this window. But like that short. And then again, back to the Grenada game, like, I just don't think he brought, I understand, the goal and the assist that Areola did. But like, just control the ball and understanding, concept of a game. Like, I don't see it, and I don't get it almost to the Roldan level. Those two really bother me.
Yeah, I think what I'll say for Jordan Morris is that he does have a history for the national team of scoring, right? Yeah. And it's a history; it's not a present, because I definitely think there has been a noticeable decline of his game from the last injury, which happens. Like, it sucks for him that he got injured, and I know people say, "Oh, well, he's been playing." It doesn't. You don't just go back to playing and you're back to full health after an ACL tear. It just doesn't happen. You miss a whole year of playing soccer at that point.
I also agree with you. Like, before the injury, Morris was one of the few guys scoring, and everybody was like, "You gotta cut him loose. He doesn't have the talent." And it's like, yeah, talent matters to a point, but winning games, especially in a tournament, is all that matters.
Yeah.
And I know he's got the one. Maybe that's the confidence boost. He's looked horrible in my opinion. Like, at the end of World Cup qualifying, I thought he was the worst player. Had no impact on the game. And then, here up until that goal, I thought he was ineffective. But again, like, I think, to me, I put him ahead of Areola because scoring goals is what we need. And this guy has a history of it. And same with Pepe, people have said a lot about Pepe. I said, yeah, but when it mattered, that's the only guy that's gotten it done. So to me, like, until someone else gets it done, I take the guy that has done it once for me, and I get that,
Yeah. Well, we got out of there with a draw, thanks to Jordan Morris. We're currently second in our Group D of League A in the Nations League. And the only reason we're second is because El Salvador has played more matches than we have. We have 2 coming up in March. Essentially, all we have to do is not lose to El Salvador, and I think we'll win the league or this group and advance to the semifinals for that coming up in June of next year. The big question, obviously, are these games worthwhile to prepare for a World Cup? And I do think the El Salvador game had some redeeming qualities to it once we look back on it.
I thought the guys put a chip on their shoulder and finished the game strong, which is exactly what I want. One of my favorite things that maybe Berhalter has done in a long time from a game situation. I just dogged him for not doing it, but he called CCB over and resorted his team based off of the
Yeah.
red card. Like he was not complaining to the ref. Like he immediately was like, okay, this is what we need to do tactically. My second favorite thing that he's done is when they scored, he ran in and like, let's do it again. He, like, those were a couple of things that I don't think that I've seen a lot of from him in game. I've seen people shrugging at him, shaking their head at him, frustrated with him. But it looked like he had command of both of those moments to understand the stakes and keep his team pumped, which I think are immensely valuable moments. Down a man, needing a tie, hopefully a win and driving forward. Like those are the little nuggets to guys like a CCB, Luca, who hasn't had a ton of experience working with Greg. Like, I think those are things that will probably stick with some of that second tier guys that they haven't gotten to see because they weren't part of Nations League and, the other trophies last year. Yeah.
Now, when you look back at not just the Nations League, but this entire June window as a whole, Greg said it was basically the last tryout for the final. What we assume, I think it's all been confirmed that it will be 26 for the World Cup.
Yeah.
When you look at this, what is one player that you think absolutely helped their chances to go to Qatar, if not completely sealed it?
I think it's probably CCB. I think he's probably the guy to me. Like, I don't think Haji got a fair shake personally, but probably didn't do much to overtake even a PFOC who may not be the third one, for all we know. But probably put himself out of contention for a top three. I think Luca was already there, but probably secured it, like locked in, ahead of guys like Busio and things like that, that maybe if he'd had a bad window, might have slipped. I think that fifth, center back spot is still open. Looks like Long is pretty much locked in at this point. Haven't played for this summer. I have my opinions of that.
Yeah,
you do too.
Y'all couldn't see, but I just rolled my eyes really big when he said Long. But yeah, I mean, whatever.
I think he's in though. I hope that Richards is amongst that top three. In my opinion, he's earned it. I think the fourth spot, is pretty wide open with Robinson having slid. I don't know that he has enough time. I don't remember his injury trajectory.
I mean, he tore his Achilles back in April. It's just
no chance.
It's not happening. Actually, May. It was the beginning of May.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, even sooner. Oh my gosh.
So
it feels like a long time ago.
Well, as an Atlanta fan, we've had multiple injuries that have happened throughout the season. But I'm with you. I actually think CCV may have pushed himself into the top three spot. When you talk about, to me, I think it's very clear that Richards and Zimmerman are the two pole position center backs in terms of starting. And we all know that Richards didn't play this camp because not that he is currently injured, but he was coming off injury. It just didn't make sense.
Yep.
He's also fighting for a spot on the team at Bayern, which is way more important for his development as a player. And honestly, for the success of the national team, if he's playing for Bayern or maybe he gets a permanent loan or deal to Hoffenheim, whatever, he has important things to worry about.
Yep.
I think CCV showed that he was, in my opinion, the third best center back we have available right now.
My only hesitancy is the competition. Like, I'd like to see him. Hopefully he gets one in an upcoming friendly and kind of like cuts his teeth in a big game. Like, I would understand if Berhalter didn't want to start him in a meaningful match like a World Cup, having never put him in that position before. That would be my only caution of that. But I agree. I think he played well enough. He's looked very solid where he is in his career. Like I was saying earlier, like I think he's on a good trajectory for a center back. Like this is when what you have. I heard EPB didn't have a great camp. I was disappointed for that.
I was too, because I think he actually has better potential, but I also heard he got hurt. So it's like, okay, maybe he got injured and maybe that was why. That stuff is frustrating because I think EPB deserves that look. But again, both EPB and CCV are on the good side of 25, which means by the World Cup in 2026, they should be at a prime age for a center back to be leading a back line. And
I agree. And have time and have interest from Europe, which is huge.
Yeah. The last point that I need to talk about this entire camp is someone other than Christian Pulisic needs to take free kicks.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's Reyna. I really think it's Reyna, and he just wasn't healthy.
I don't know if Reyna's a starter, though, is my issue, is because I don't know. I personally wouldn't start him over Weah. Maybe he starts in that Brendan Aronson attacking midfield role. But I agree with you. I think Reyna's the best free kick taker we have
I haven't
honestly.
seen BA. I was trying to remember if Aronson had taken any. I wonder if
He
that'll be
didn't
part
take
of
any
his
of
game
this.
as he
Yeah.
gets. But I mean, just professionally, if he used to do that at all.
He did for Salzburg. I'm curious to see how that translates to Leeds. He has taken them for the US and they weren't great. So I'm with you. It's just like I don't know what the other option is other than
I don't think
Reina.
Busio is playing well enough to even be
No.
in the mix at this point. He
Yeah.
took a couple decent ones. Acosta's
Yep.
taken some decent ones on free kicks, not necessarily corners, but
I
maybe
mean, Musa
Dest.
hit a great free kick in this game too. So who
Yeah.
had the best game of the El Salvador? I mean, he was phenomenal this game.
Oh
You have
yeah.
to say that.
Yeah, I want to mention that too. I think a lot of people have been maybe itching for Luca. I cannot imagine MMA being broken up if those three are healthy until they
Yeah.
really falter. I think that's the strongest central midfield pairing. I'm curious about Musa and Luca a little bit. Like coming
Sure.
off the bench, like
Yeah.
that combo of a dribbler versus a passer, like
Yeah.
that would unlock a lot centrally. But I love Musa, his attitude, his
Yeah.
physicality, the big smile on his face. Like he plays the game, keeps me excited. He's creeping up as one of my favorite players right now.
He played like a grown man in this game, and Luca did very well when he came on too. And I think you kind of hit on it as like if you have to start Luca because like we're just rotating because obviously you want to kind of do that when you're playing. It's fine to then have to bring in Musa for him, or maybe you put Luca on for Musa or McKinney, where it's like, hey, we need to slow the game down and get more possession. A lot of things like that are good. I think we kind of see the top three central midfielders after this camp.
Yeah, I also wonder we didn't talk about it, and I meant to mention it. The backup six, like after Acosta, what if one of those two is injured? Like, who is it? Is it Luca? I mean, we haven't
Is it
even
Luca? Is
tested
it
him.
Musa? Is it yeah? Who knows?
Depending on the competition, now a big physical team, I wouldn't really want Luca back there, but maybe a
No.
Wales, maybe in England, like maybe maybe there's a rotation of like a 2 6s
Sure.
and an 8, Weston and Luca paired behind a Musa or Aronson.
Yeah.
You can play with it a little bit with those different skill sets that group has.
Yeah, I'm wondering on the women's side, we see Lindsay Horan oftentimes be the second choice six, which I don't love, but she's good enough as a soccer player to do it. And I kind of feel like Musa and McKinney and Delatorre kind of fill that role of like they're good soccer players. They know what to do in that role.
Yeah. It'll be interesting.
All right, let's talk real quick about the U20s. They are coming up for a tournament. Concacaf U20 Championships coming up starting on Saturday, January 18th. It goes through July 3rd. We have to make to the final to qualify for both the U20 World Cup for next year and the 2024 Olympics. Now, we haven't made the Olympics in 4 tries. I don't think it is as detrimental to development of the game or growth of this game as we have made it out to be, but I do think it's one of those where, like, as I keep saying, we need to be at the Olympics. If we want to be a top team, not only in CONCACAF, but in the world, we need to be at the Olympics. When you saw this roster, I know a lot of folks were perturbed that MLS did not release some key players, but what do you make of the squad as a whole, the 20-man squad for this tournament?
Yeah, I like it. And I'm probably on the other end of the scale. Like, I know we want to develop the national team, but I kind of like that MLS has kind of got a chip on its shoulder that they want to win games and that they care a bit more, if that makes sense. Like I want them to want to be better and produce better and build the game. So there's part of me that's like, I love the U.S. national team clearly, but I also I respect it in a way that I'm like, okay, as long as you're playing them and they're getting experience and they're getting, a turn, it's not just like, stonewalling for the sake of stonewalling.
Right.
I actually like a little bit that the MLS is trying to drive forward. Now, I think the national team is the best way to get those players noticed internationally. So I think it's a poor decision in the big picture. Because
I do have to ask if the CONCACAF championships are the best platform for that. Because I'm looking at from Atlanta specifically, because that's the club that I follow most. We let Tyler Wolff go. We did not let Caleb Wiley go. And Caleb Wiley will likely be our starting left back come Sunday when we play, Inter Miami. So, and I think we had the same thing with like Obed Vargas from Seattle, where I get that some clubs are willing to let those go, but like Atlanta and Seattle, I think look at those players and go, we need them to play in our games.
Yeah. And developmentally, like those reps matter, taking
Yeah.
2-3 weeks off as you're that young, just getting into your dietary routine, your game day
Yeah.
preparation
Yeah.
routine, like those things really, really matter to those young guys from, a lot of the guys that I've spoken to and their clubs as well. Like that could set you back 6 weeks because they're like, well, we don't know where you're at after that camp, and you've got to kind of rebuild trust because we were working with this other guy for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
it makes a difference. Yeah.
I think for me, I understand wanting MLS clubs to release these players. I think the expectation that they do it is misguided. And I think the anger at them is misguided. It should be directed at either FIFA or Concacaf, especially Concacaf, who you had a whole 2-week window in June that you could have played this tournament. Yeah. And you chose to start it directly after the window closes. That to me is a mistake on Concacaf's part, not yelling at an MLS club for not wanting a guy to miss 4 to 5 games.
Right. And I also, maybe because I spend too much time looking at it, like I think we have the depth that, number 75 in our depth chart from USL, like should still be able to get out of CONCACAF, like I think we have the depth, the development systems. We talked about it earlier. USL has got a great development system. They have no reason not to release people. It's a great marketing opportunity for them. I do think it matters a little bit. Like I've interviewed Chris Richards, and he spoke specifically about beating Mexico and how important that was to him and his group for the next cycle. So I think there is value there. I do think people watch it, especially in the later rounds when it's US Mexico.
Yes.
People are watching how they develop on the international game because they want, US marketing, so if you're going to make the senior team like Chris Richards was, Bayern liked that, Bayern was interested in that, even at that level. Getting U.S. media and trying to grow their international league here matters to a lot of those guys.
I think there's no one correct answer. I think everything is a very situational answer. I mean, again, I look at Obed Vargas for Seattle, a guy who has been very instrumental in their team. I mean, he's either starting or playing almost every game. So I get why they wouldn't just let him go. But we've got Cuba, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Canada in our group. Now, Canada, historically at the youth levels, are pretty anonymous. Cuba is a team that, Cuba and St. Kitts, we got to beat them. My AO chapter is participating in Pride Raiser, and I'm looking at that going like, oh man, we're going to hopefully donate a lot of money based on those 2 games, right?
Yep.
You get out of the group, I think we'll play, it's probably, if we don't win the group, it's Nicaragua. If we do win the group, we'll play a second place team from, I forget which other group. The point is, the competition level, let's just be real honest, is not deep in CONCACAF at the youth level. But we have failed to qualify for the Olympics 4 times in a row. Now, granted, most of those is because we freaking find a way to lose to Honduras.
Yeah.
Let's forecast that. Is this at the U20 level? We've been really good at these U20 championships. We won the last one.
Yeah.
So do you think that the U20 age limit is better for us as opposed to having the Olympic tournament that we've had in the past?
I mean, I thought we should have been at the Olympics with the talent that we brought. I don't know why we brought 4 defensive midfielders for our entire central midfield and still probably should have won, those games that we had. I mean, we had the opportunities except for a couple of flukes, Ochoa had a gaff and a couple things happen. We are producing, like we were talking about earlier, I mean, 14 and 15-year-olds that are starting to prepare professionally at the USL in our second tier soccer league. Josh Winder, is playing as a
Jonathan
16-year-old.
Gomez,
16 years old.
Yeah, he's like the first, but there's Kobe Henry. There's so many coming up behind him. Yeah.
We should be able to produce guys that have 2 and 3 years of professional experience going to a U20 tournament in North America. Like that, like some of these, 21, 22-year-olds don't have that experience from some of these countries just because they don't have access, to even a domestic league. For us to lose that, I think is more on the coach, the system, and, the federation not being able to execute, putting the right talent on the field with a leader that can guide them to win those games.
I think we all agree that the last year's debacle was mostly on Jason Kreis, and I think a lot on U.S. Soccer for not I don't think it should be Jason Kreis's sole job to build that roster. It should be the U.S. men's national team system, and that's where
Stewart and others should be identifying those.
I don't know what Brian McBride is doing if he's not helping the U20/Olympic coach build these rosters. Now, we have a different coach this time around, a coach who I think is a pretty well respected coach in both youth and professional ranks. I think that makes a difference personally.
I do too. I would expect us to run pretty handily through this. You know, we have some strong, professionals that are scoring goals, guys getting, real reps at the professional level for multiple years. And now with the USL and the MLS Next Pro, even those guys are getting real reps, against some serious talent. I would expect us to have a lot of experience and confidence walking into those games.
Do we make the final?
Yeah, I think we do, no question.
Do we beat Mexico and just leave them completely mudded and understanding that we're the dominant team in this region?
I think there's a real chip on the U.S. players' mentality about wanting to be king of Concacaf. Like I've heard it, across the board. You saw Horvath's celebration in that game.
Yeah.
You saw what it meant to Weston and Pulisic to play them in World Cup qualifying. I think we really have got. We're in the power seat, and I think the kids are going to want to not lose that.
Yeah.
And these guys are pros. I mean, they're hungry for it, and they're trying to make a name for themselves. And that's a game that I think people know people are going to be watching around.
Yeah, I 100% agree that when you talk about the semifinal and final, that is where these European clubs are going. Okay, you did what against Mexico? Yes, we'll take notice of that. And you have, a lot of guys on this roster who have a chance to make a big move because of this, or if at least not this one, but the 2023 Youth World Cup next year, that's got to be a motivating factor too.
Yeah, and people are upset that it's not the Stars, but I'm kind of like happy that it isn't, because I think some guys that would not have been on a European radar, if we can win this, with our B squad, those guys are going to make a name for themselves, and the A guys are already on their way. Vargas is going to be in Europe, in a couple of years, guys
exactly.
Like they're not hurting by missing this on their career trajectory. Now, the third or fourth defensive midfielder, one of those guys may come up and get a start and
sure.
Shut down somebody in a big game and get on somebody's radar. So to me, I get excited about the guys that nobody's talking about. Getting talked about.
Well, that's what you do all day, every day. So I appreciate you shedding your knowledge for this U20 World Cup and giving your takes on, a very, I think, still an important window or series of games for the U.S. men's national team in this Nations League. We have a break until September for the men's side. That is nice, but you will be busy covering the U20 World Concacaf Championship. Where can we follow you to make sure we're staying up on all of this?
Yeah, at Chasing a Cup on Twitter is kind of the sweet spot, and then on occasion I pop on podcasts and do a little bit on YouTube as well. So, but yeah, follow the handle on Twitter. That's where the action's at. Got a bunch of writers doing some exciting stuff, ranking the top 50 U20, and then there's been a biweekly piece on top U20s in MLS, and so there's a lot of opportunity there to catch up. And I think this is an exciting time, honestly, because there's a big break from waiting for the World Cup, and you get to start getting excited about 2026, which is I think going to be a pretty awesome year coming off the city's announcement.
Absolutely, there is a lot to be excited about if you're a U.S. soccer fan. Also, for those who aren't aware, we'll have the U.S. women playing a series of friendlies against Colombia before they go to the Concacaf Women's Championships. We will have a podcast about that coming out for the U.S. women, talking about the CONCACAF Championships. But a lot of soccer coming up. And again, follow at Chasing a Cup on Twitter to stay on top of all of that, because the content is worthwhile. And again, it's a great way to just have names on your radar. So when you see a roster or see people on Twitter who talk about random people who you're like, who the hell is this kid? It's just a good way to be like, oh yeah, I heard about him. So I appreciate what y'all do.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. It's fun.
Well, again, follow them at Chasing a Cup. Thanks, Marcus, for being on here. And again, follow our show at Soccer for Us Pod. And I appreciate your knowledge and takes on this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You too. It was fun coming.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.